Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to continue to come back to Extreme Ghostbusters. Thank you guys for otherwise just watching these. Cause really, like, especially these three episodes, I had a lot more fun like watching these episodes than the other three that I watched previously. But I guess I'm just gonna keep on coming back to these. Hopefully, people will maybe like eventually I'll go through like these span of like Extreme Ghostbusters and maybe go into Real Ghostbusters and whichever, however anybody would like me to go through it, especially if they're real Ghostbusters like fans or whichever. Especially if you are real Ghostbusters fans or whatever. I don't know why I have to say whatever. Uh, like these episodes actually like remind me a lot of like real Ghostbuster episodes. And so like we're gonna have fun like talking about these and like going through them. So this should be episodes through 19 through episode 21. So like 19, 20, and 21, of course. So actually in episode 19, we have to go and have the Ghostbusters go up against a Norse mythology like a character who is to be called Racefelk, and like this comes into being kind of like a dragon kind of episode, but like it basically feels like the Ghostbusters are like going up against Storm in this episode. If the X-Men character Storm went up against the Extreme Ghostbusters, this would kind of be this episode. But if anything, like the very beginning of this episode, when they're to talk about like them having like a heat wave and stuff like that, where they're kind of complaining about the weather. That is a pretty basic real Ghostbusters episode for you. Like, I don't know how many times every episode would normally begin with them talking about some kind of weather that they're having, or it would lead to them eating something, or it would lead to them like having like some kind of like problem with something or someone in the firehouse. Like a lot of times it would be that like somebody may be like jerking their chores or something like that. It would be some kind of common thing that eventually led to like them just transitioning for that episode, because there might be just someone that's just not pulling their weight, and so like somebody has to get crap for that throughout the whole entire episode. So like that is kind of like the 19th episode, and then the 20th episode goes into supposedly this like seedling of a monster, and like we kind of get to this being like the Ghostbusters against like poison ivy kind of monster. Just kind of going into like just some simplifying a very simplification of this, but eventually we're going to go into spoilers and I'm going to talk about this more in depth, believe me. And like for some reason, like if like the drawings probably weren't done to like match like the cartoon of like Jumanji, if anyone were to ever see the Jumanji cartoon, like this episode kind of very much felt like a Jumanji kind of cartoon. Um, but yeah, so and eventually we like meet a character who has a number of names in that episode, but eventually they find out what this person's actual name is. And then the last episode is a St. Patrick's Day episode, which ties into a leprechaun, which is to have us eventually do some fun things with this current mayor. That I think probably in the very first review I probably didn't talk about, because I think in the pilot episode we did have some tying in with the mayor on the pilot episode, where Egon is using his PKE meter to kind of check for like certain things, and the mayor is to kind of give him flack. So but like in the Leprechaun episode, they go through a lot of like stereotypical like Leprechaun-esh of a things, like burnt toast and like a lot of goofy things, which I did enjoy. But yeah, so uh, but other than that, yeah, like these had a real true vibe of like the real Ghostbusters kind of episodes fused into this new generation of characters. Um, but yeah, like at least we didn't get another Roland heavy episode where like Roland, like I love Roland, but good God, like I think a lot of those episodes are honestly just boring. Like I love the man. Like believe me, I like all these characters. Like eventually, when the original run came out, I'm like, man, I want to get every single one of these, um, like action figures. I think the only ones that they probably didn't have was Garrett's one. I'm assuming there has to be probably an easy reason for that, but like I think they had like most of the action figures out. Like they had Slimer, Eduardo, Roland, Kylie might have had one. I know Egon did. But anyways, mood point. So but yeah, so let's go into the double five time territory. These were fun, like like a lot better than the other ones. But yeah, the like through most of these, I might go into like real Ghostbusters comparisons because, like especially the very first one, like I always go into like, hey, if there's like a pterodactyl or a kind of like monster, there's always certain comparisons to certain other kind of Ghostbuster episodes. But with that said, it's about time to go out of our way to say that it is that coveted time yet again to go into spoilers about these episodes. Let's get into spoiler time, spoiler time. It's about that time I'm going to spoil this episode, or these episodes, I should say, because I'm doing multiple of them. So, in episode 19, we have this thing called the Scepter of Donar, or Donar? Yeah, I think I'm saying that right. So we have some farmers that are in desperate need of rain, and I'm like, oh my god, like you would see a lot of these kinds of episodes where people would try to uh like if they desperately need something like protection or whatever, they would be channeling or coming up with some ancestral thing to eventually try and be able to get desperately what they need or make an offer to someone, sell their soul or something like that. And so this is honestly somewhat no different. So we have the Scepter of Donar being put out onto this out onto this thing of farm, and so this kid is to read this scripture, and all of a sudden, it is to release out a character called the Race Felk. All of a sudden, accidentally, this scripture, I guess, had been destroyed during this kid going, and after saying this, the scripture ended up getting destroyed. I guess luckily this kid didn't have to trade his soul for a thing of rain, luckily for them. So uh the elders of this son are to eventually just go like, oh my god, you unleash this out into the world, like you should have done that, because eventually you can't tame this thing, you can't control it, and eventually just weather will just go extremely wild. And sure enough, it does. So cue us having, I guess, this barn and the Ghostbusters headquarters somewhere, I guess, nearby, because that makes sense, right? That all of a sudden the Ghostbusters would just be easily to find this Race Felk thing, because eventually this thing just heads its way to eventually the Ghostbusters headquarters at some point. So the Ghostbusters are talking about like drastic weather change, how yesterday it was really like cold, like record breaking cold, and now it's like record breaking hot. And so we have Egon that is mentioning that there probably will have to be some equipment adjustments to the drastic weather change, and so uh, we also have like seemingly in most of these episodes, uh, like a consistent like fight over food. Like there's always usually a chocolate bar, usually in every single episode somewhere where somebody's eating something. And normally that seems to be Garrett consistently. If it's not Garrett, it's Slimer, or if it's not Slimer, it's Eduardo. Somebody's eating something usually. So, but anyways, so what ends up happening is this son and his father end up coming to the Ghostbusters to mention that they have unleashed this race Falk out onto the world, and so hence the reason for this drastic change of weather. So Kylie is to eventually pick up a book because it seems like she's usually the only one who can pick up a book besides probably Roland or probably Egon, and so I'm kind of saying this in kind of like yeah, of course, like these people would only be able to like every once in a while we'll see Garrett who eventually like tries to be smart in some episodes, but a lot of times he is the plucky guy or whatever. So anyways, so uh Kylie is to open a book because her name is Griffin, and she is to talk about Norse mythology. I'm like, oh, a griffin who knows about Norse mythology. I wonder why. So, because like most, like Griffin is usually tied to either like Irish or Scottish things a lot. There's supposedly a big, gigantic clan of griffins that are either tied to Irish or Scottish things. I'm gonna have to pause here for a second. All right, so so we have the Ghostbusters go and meet the Race Falk, and coincidentally, the Race Falk is on its way to Ghostbusters headquarters because it's making its way to town. So we have like the worst possible like weather imaginable happening while the Ghostbusters are in the Ecto One. All of a sudden, we have like a mixture of all kinds of weather, but all of a sudden we have this like abnormally like gigantic size hail that all of a sudden just beats the living crap out of the Ecto One. And so Roland is like, "Oh my God, the car, the car!" And it's like, "But what about the bird?" It's like, "No, the car, the car." So all of a sudden, what eventually happens is, we eventually get where like the worst possible weather is just coming at the Ghostbusters. There's like this giant sized snowball that is going to come and frickin' take out the Ghostbusters, and it eventually just hits Eduardo. And so we have like Garrett who tells Eduardo, it's like, "Oh look, it's Frosty, the idiot boy." Like it's just like, yeah, like you always get like whoever ends up getting like clobbered with something always has to be like the one who has to, of course, gets the ridicule. Like whoever gets it that one day, sometimes it's Garrett, sometimes it's Eduardo. But it rarely does Kylie get crap like out of all the group. Like, and like Egon doesn't get much crap either, just because a lot of times like Egon won't like take it. Like if he was to actually get insulted, like Egon like wouldn't even like acknowledge it. So like that's why they never really like give him crap, because he just doesn't acknowledge it. Uh Smart move on his part. Usually Roland only gets like crap on him when basically it's like centered, like a Roland centered episode, which I have no problem with. I'm like, I just like I was just like, okay, like is it one of those where it's like they do certain like centered episodes to give people time off, or like is it just like hey, pay somebody more than whichever characters. I don't know. Like, I don't know what wrong of reasoning that they went about that, but like, I guess to give a lot of people time off. Like, I think that's what ended up happening in a lot of these episodes. That's why you would see like the Kylie episode where it's uh, like it's more focused on Kylie, and then everybody else can just kind of like take some time to themselves. So, but with that said, so eventually, of course, this episode just reminds me of the Bird of Kill Darby episode from the real Ghostbusters, because we just have a giant bird-looking character that seems to have some like tying into something. But so, but eventually we get where they are trying to figure out how to bust this ghost, and it really seems like they can't use their proton packs against it, because it just seems like they can't actually like get to the ghost, or it seems like whatever weather is to have this race folk attack them with, it just kind of like weakens their proton streams a lot of times. So like, especially when it's to rain, like, I guess like they never factored in the fact that they would be taking down like ghosts outside or whatever. Like, they never had like an adjustment that they'd have to do, I guess. Uh so eventually what ends up happening is they are just deciding, well, maybe we need the Scepter of Donar to try to take this thing down. And so Egon is to tell the group, it's like, well, the museum person will not allow us at all to take the Scepter of Donar. And so it seems that eventually Slimer is to go and grab this thing and take it for the Ghostbusters to eventually use. At one point, we have the Race Felk who ends up like crashing through this one theater, and I thought that was kind of like a funny thing that they did, where it was like a 3D movie where all of a sudden like we have this like different kind of thing going on with this 3D movie where people are like, oh wow, like this is really 3D. So, but so what they end up deciding to do is one person is to go and hold the Scepter of Donar up, and the Ghostbusters are to go and blast their proton streams through this like gem part of the Scepter of Donar to like strengthen their power of their blasters to like be able to trap this scepter of or this race Falk. So of course, as per usual, who would volunteer? The moron of the year. Like, the guy that always is to be the volunteer, because Eduardo always has to volunteer. Because at first it seemed like it was going to be Slimer, but Slimer does something else in this episode. So Eduardo volunteers, and I'm like, couldn't we just see like a change of like why does it always have to be Eduardo? Is that what his thing is? He's the volunteer guy, and so like that will always be his thing every episode. Like, they can't just change it up somehow where Garrett volunteers. How rarely does that happen? So like, the only time that Garrett is to volunteer is because everyone else is just basically like gonzo. But anyways, so Eduardo is to put the Scepter of Donar up, so they blast it, and then they end up trapping the Race Falk. The problem is that there is a tornado going on still, via them still wrapping the Race Falk up. They thought, or naturally assumed, that once the Race Falk was to be gone, that like all the weather would have just been back to normal, but I guess not. So Egon is to bizarrely just have this assumption that I guess someone could go into this eye of the tornado and like blast their proton stream and be able to neutralize this tornado. And so one person would have to just basically like sacrifice themselves to go in and take this thing down. And so it's like, well, who's going to be the other volunteer? And so coincidentally, that has to be Slimer. Slimer goes and takes Eduardo's proton pack and goes on and goes into the tornado, and they're like, he'll never make it. It's like, if anything, like, he's just a ton of slime, so he's just gonna get freaking just, like, there's no way. But, like, Slimer goes in, puts on the proton pack, starts to blast into the tornado, and so eventually the tornado, like, dissipates or just stops, and so all of a sudden they're like, man, like, he took the bullet for us. Like, yeah, like I'll take back every bad thing that I said about him. And then all of a sudden, Slimer comes flying out of the sky without a proton pack, of course. And so Slimer goes and falls right on Eduardo. And then Eduardo starts saying, like, you little... So, like basically everything that Eduardo just said and everything that all the Ghostbusters just said, they took it all back. Because of course they would. So, like, that is a bulk of what happens in episode 19. Let's go into episode 20. So, episode 20 is to, of course, be like a food episode, because there's a whole reason for that. So, there is to be some professor that is to be opening up a box that has to forcibly say Brazil on it, like in big fat lettering. So, like, hey, where is this box coming from? I hope it's from Brazil. Because I wouldn't be able to just read the address and just say it's Brazil on it. No, it has to slap the word Brazil on it so I know. So, this guy is to open up this box and to all of a sudden have this, like, interesting looking seed that he's never seen before that evidently has some face on it. And all of a sudden, this seedling comes alive and is all of a sudden like sprouting all of these plants to go wild. And so this professor runs to this other professor to just be like, hey, sir, like, it seems that I have somehow find some seedling that is, like, abnormal. I've never seen it in my life. And so all of a sudden we have this one professor who ends up getting, like, podded up, or like a pod person turns into the, like, pod thing he's cocooned in. And the other professor is like, oh my god, I'm gonna need help. I'm gonna call the Ghostbusters. So title ensues, as cool as it is, and they don't use all of the other... They don't... The thing that I just was kind of just so, like, defeated about looking up at this, like, title screen is, like, they don't use any of these ghosts. They don't use the end credit scene and the opening scene. They don't use any of these ghosts. They basically just copy and paste from the real Ghostbusters stuff. And, like, I guess they just figured, like, like, we just wanted to come up with the intro scene before anything else. But I'm like, but like, couldn't they have ever have changed it? No, because they don't want to spend the money. Plus also, like, when looking at the very, like, pilot episodes from now, like, it seemed like bizarrely they used, like, a lot of dark colors. Like, everything seemed to be very blue in a lot of shots. And there was a lot of stuff that seemed to be, like, very, like, weirdly dark. But, like, in all of these other episodes, they made things, like, a lot brighter. Like, was there copyright issues that they were worried about? So they just kind of blued a lot of stuff? Or, like, what was their reasoning for, like, the blueness and, like, the kind of, like, the color directions that they went through in the early stages? And, like, the more that you can kind of see stuff in these episodes, like, what were their decision-making reasoning things? Were they just like, man, we just wanted to quickly get these episodes out, so that's just the way they looked? I don't know. Like, it just kind of, like, it always kind of confused me. I don't know. But anyways, so this episode looks like a Jumanji episode to me. But anyways, so So at first, I would have called this the seedling monster because I didn't know what else to call it. But anyways, uh so in this episode we have Garrett, who was to seemingly have like a rack of ribs and all kinds of like meat eating food, and supposedly Kylie clears all of that out to instead uh give the guys like tofu and vegetables and all this kind of interesting food that probably will not taste all that interesting or good, and because it probably won't. So Slimer, of course, hates vegetables, so I knew he was probably going to get sick with this because, like, Slimer's greatest fear, I think, is vegetables. So I thought immediately he would probably Ralph Nader. Meaning barf. So Garrett is just like, you know what? I'm not going to take this. I'm going to go and order a pizza, a large pizza. And so all of a sudden, Garrett is to order that pizza to eventually just have Slimer eventually showcase that he ate the whole thing and basically got rid of it and got rid of the evidence of it, obviously on screen. So pushing us on. So we are to eventually find out that this is to uh, eventually have the Ghostbusters get called to eventually go after this threat of this plant life like ghost. So all of a sudden we are to like consistently have these Ghostbusters go through these flights of stairs, all kinds of things to eventually fight this threat. And so eventually, once they actually make it to the actual plant monsters, how they look kind of like hands, like how you kind of see them here, like with my hand out here going rawr. I had fun there. So, like also this kind of like reminded me of like Tremors, bizarrely. I don't know why, but it just kind of did. So the Kevin Bacon movie, if you guys ever remember that, it has a huge gigantic of a franchise which I never quite understood, but like hey, it's still rolling with it. So eventually we find once this seedling is to eventually like have all these plants get destroyed, all of a sudden the seedling just separates from it, like grows legs, and then all of a sudden starts like trying to find the next uh like source of plant life that it can attach itself onto. So they're like the Ghostbusters are just like, well, like obviously this thing got away, but where the heck did it go? It just went into the pocket of the other professor, the much more older professor. So all of a sudden, once this older professor is to make his way to his lab, all of a sudden we have this seedling who decides that, oh, well, I am just going to go ahead and just go and uh, like attach myself to this plant life. So it seems like the Ghostbusters are trying to figure out like what Brazilian like demonish thing could be attached to this. And so Kylie made the only assumption that this thing has to be a Kuja. Or a Kuja? Yeah, that's how they pronounced it. So Kylie is just to assess that this thing is to, with its pod people, like she assesses that it just needs to go back to its dormancy and everything will be fine. But uh, Kylie is actually inaccurate, and we'll find out later that dormant is a bad thing. Because Kylie is to go off with this freezing gun to try to dormant this thing, and it's the wrong maneuver. Uh, so what ends up happening is that this professor is to call up the Ghostbusters and be like, "Help me!" And so bizarrely, they have some like caller ID that eventually can tell them like what address this spot is to be. I'm like good enough for them because there's gonna be a lot of emergency calls that I think should have like an address attached to them or whatever. So we have the elder professor that ends up turning into a pod person as well, and so eventually we get to just transition on to, because every time this plant thing is to transition somewhere, eventually like it like kills all of its plant life of previously, and or previous like housing, and so all of a sudden we just eventually just start to see like a whole building crumple at the beginning of this episode, or eventually we just start to just see like stuff getting ruined at points in time here. So eventually we have Kylie, who is off in some part of this forest to try to freeze Kuja, who she believes, and Garrett is to go and try to stop her. And so Egon is to make the actual correct assumption that this thing is not actually Kuja, it's a demon called Shambahak. Yeah, say that 4 times fast. So Shambahak, 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 Shambahak. I guess that's actually very easy. Who would have thought? So, so Shambahak is to be a thing where if it lays dormant, it's going to be laying dormant for 2,000 years, which means pod people will be laying dormant for 2,000 years as well. And also Garrett will be laying for 2,000 years, and he will die off of old age. So that leads to have Roland and Eduardo making it to Kylie and be like, "Yeah, you need to stop what you're doing." But like the proton packs won't work to try to get this Shambahawk to come out of its seed to become a ghost. So Eduardo makes the stupid decision of going and getting uh, a fire extinguisher because he thinks that like carbon dioxide or whatever could kill this thing, and but it's actually just feeding it. And so Kylie makes the realization that, oh, like if anything, we just need oxygen to like suffocate this plant. So bizarrely, this freezing gun just bizarrely just turns into an oxygen gun. I don't know how that just quickly just happens, but it just does because Roland just has this one little screwdriver like at the nick of time here to all of a sudden adjust this weapon into an oxygen gun, because just whatever the story just needs, just like change this freezing gun into an oxygen gun, whatever, right? So all of a sudden, like Kylie is to suffocate this thing with oxygen of all things, and so that takes the plant and turns it into a seed, which turns the seed into a ghost, which turns ghost into trapped ghost, which turns everybody back into normal again because ghost is then again trapped. So all of a sudden, Garrett is now cooking instead of Kylie, and so what does he end up coming up with? Tossed salad, because he's like, yeah, revenge is served with croutons and ranch dressing. And so I guess he, after all, decided, heck yeah, like I'm gonna have a salad now because I'm gonna get back at that one plant thing for trying to get at us. So like, yeah, I guess interesting enough, right? So transition us. So the very beginning of this episode, we have some construction work being done on this one place, and so the lead boss is to try to get this whole construction work wrapped up really quickly because it's holiday tomorrow. And so the one construction guy is like, well, yeah, of course it's a holiday tomorrow. It's St. Patrick's Day. Like, there's no way we're probably going to be working on the day because uh, time and a half or whatever. Like, because obviously nobody's probably going to be having a construction worker probably work on a holiday. And if they do, man, are they going to be raking in the dough? So, uh, so all of a sudden we have this construction worker who goes into a room and he is to see this like collection of pipes in this one part of this room. This guy is to grab on this collection of pipes. One of the pipes he pulls is to open some secret door. this construction worker ends up going through this secret door to all of a sudden be in the mix of some leprechaun who coincidentally this one man is to be tied to one of the four sons of, or one of the X amount of sons of Aaron. And because every single one of these things is to tie into some name that eventually this leprechaun is to eventually cross off one or the other. Uh, so this person is to be terrorized with some bull animation because uh like anything that the leprechaun is to create is some bizarre animation, some cartoon or some whatever. And so this first thing is to be some bull animation, and so this guy is to not reveal where this pot of gold that this leprechaun is to want and not receive. So uh we just have the leprechaun who ends up retrieving this one guy to scratch a name off this one bizarrish thing of names. So transition us to eventually having the Ghostbusters eventually getting called because of some leprechaun just kind of wreaking havoc on these construction guys. So all of a sudden, there's a very top of this building where there's to be a guy, I believe his name is O'Toole, who is to get eventually uh, terrified by some animated monster of sorts or whichever. So the people are to find burnt toast at this location, and also they're to talk about Blarney stones and all kinds of goofiness. It's all tied into leprechaun ease and stuff like that. So because eventually they'll talk about how burnt toast and mistletoes are signs of leprechauns. I guess they're kind of a dead giveaway, I guess. So anyways, so a leprechaun is to go after a guy named O'Toole, and so that leads us to seemingly have the leprechaun eventually going after this O'Toole guy because the Ghostbusters are dealing with this animated creature that the leprechaun had given to them. So that's another name scraped off the list, and so the next guy evidently is to be some boxer. And so it seems that bizarrely this boxer is to be attacked by a mirror of himself, as a boxer, we have the leprechaun who is going and scratching the name off of this guy, and we just have this leprechaun who is just taking all these guys out. And so Egon is to make the assumption that out of all the sons of Aaron, there seems to be only one name left, and it is to be this guy called McShane, who is actually the mayor. So that leads us to have supposedly McShane, who is supposed to make an appearance at the St. Patrick's Day parade that is supposed to be on this day. So all of a sudden, we are to have the Ghostbusters try and prevent McShane from getting caught by the leprechaun. They go and they have a stakeout, but it seems that Eduardo had fallen asleep during this whole stakeout, and so the leprechaun ends up collecting McShane. We also have Garrett, who is to be dealing with a lot of bad luck in this episode, to where every single second Garrett is doing breaking something or having something fall on him, or it gets to the point where he's just going from one place to the other, and he's just getting all kinds of stuff horribly happening to him. So really Garrett is to ask Egon if they can come up with some artificial luck for him, because Egon has probably figured out a way to master that. And so all of a sudden we have Egon who ends up going and giving Garrett some kind of concoction. And so Garrett is like, yeah, I do feel lucky. I do feel good. And so Egon is like, okay, well, the thing that you just drank of, like, chuck it in the air and see if you can catch it. Garrett does. And so Garrett is like, yeah, I'm back. And so Garrett goes off. And so Janine asks Egon, it's like, is that like raspberry soda? And Egon goes, grape. Like, so, like, it was a placebo, like, to make Garrett think that he did have luck. And so, like, the placebo effect did work. So, anyways, so we now have McShane as well as the Leprechaun in his chariot. Go and take McShane out to uh, the Leprechaun parade, and I'm like, man, this has like kind of like Ghostbusters 2 vibes. Like I was waiting for like the Statue of Liberty to come into the fray of here, but like, it is what it is. Uh, so all of a sudden we have McShane in pajamas and robe and all, making his way through this parade, and so what ends up eventually happening is the Ghostbusters end up trying to take this leprechaun down, but supposedly the whole thing of it is that you have to consistently stare at this leprechaun. If you blink, he's going to be any number of places, and so really it's just a stare contest, but it's very difficult for any of the Ghostbusters to do that. We have Kylie who ended up trying that with the Blarney Stone before, and then the Blarney Stone ended up getting destroyed. Uh, so what eventually ends up happening is like the Leprechaun ends up going and taking this large statue of this thing to go and attack the Ghostbusters. Like, to me, like, I don't want to sound insensitive, but like this looks like kind of like a Native American-ish looking like statue. But like, I hope that doesn't sound offensive. I just like it looks familiar to that, but like I didn't know exactly what that was, and like if there's actual significance to this statue or whatever that this leprechaun ends up taking. Like I didn't know any better. Maybe it's actually a statue of actually Saint Patrick. I don't know, because I didn't know any better. So this fairly large statue of a thing just starts attacking the Ghostbusters, and so once they actually blast it, the statue ends up just melting down into goo. And so what eventually happens is that Garrett is to be coming in with his proton pack that I guess is charged with bad luck. So bizarrely, just for this episode, they have to have like, why can't they do that every episode? Just blast every single ghost with bad luck, and then like, man, would they be sucking, right? Like every ghost would be easily caught, and the Ghostbusters would be like freaking millionaires because they'd be like, yeah, like all we had to do was blast every single ghost with bad luck, and like, man, did it work like a charm. So what ends up happening is that the leprechaun ends up getting hit with a fake thing of gold that isn't actually like his actual gold. And so like now we have this leprechaun that is like forced with really bad luck, and so all of a sudden the Ghostbusters decide, okay, now is the time to take this thing out. Let's try to trap this. And of course they end up trapping it, and of course they end up like, yeah, like we did it. Everything goes back to normal, and all of a sudden McShane, who is the mayor, is to mention that there was bizarrely some prank that had been done by people that he worked with, and luckily, like that, like bizarrely, McShane had all like had just figured out this whole ruse, and like he like beat it, or he like got to like win over it, and like he's taking all the credit for the leprechaun getting caught. And so Garrett is just like, what the heck? So like we do all the work and like McShane gets all the credit? it's like, man, that's a batch of bad luck. And it's like, ooh, like we really have to like remember that we have like luck of this episode. So with that said, yeah, I'm gonna get the heck out of here. I enjoy these episodes. These were really fun. I liked them. Um, if I haven't said that enough, hopefully I'll get another batch of 3 good episodes when eventually I review this next. I'm gonna keep trying to review these, and I hope people enjoy them. Uh, like eventually people will be like, yeah, I love this series. Or there's some people that might just be like, yeah, like I bet you're only doing this because Ghostbusters Afterlife is coming in Thanksgiving. I'm like, I don't really care. Like I have like this really mixed bag of emotions about Ghostbusters Afterlife. Like I honestly just predicted that whole movie before it even came out, and then once I saw the trailer, I'm like, yeah, I know how this movie is going to break down, and like it's basically like a recycle movie, and I'm just like, I'm trying to like figure out a way to be happy about it, but like I don't know. I think what I'll forcibly end up having to do is I'll probably just like see what the reactions overall of people are. I don't care if it gets spoiled for me. Like I am probably gonna have like wait till like to see what people have to say, and then I'll be like, okay, maybe I'll go in. But like like whenever anyone says, "Oh man, this is the best movie ever that I've ever seen in my life," or at least it's better than the last one, then I go in there. I'm like, I don't know. Like, but I want to be like, I want to try to be optimistic, but I'm just like, man, this just feels like a rinse and repeat. Like, come on, like they could have come up with something unique, but I'm not moaning and groaning about that. Let's get on with finishing this up. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody. I apologize about me talking about Ghostbusters Afterlife. So, like, more than likely, I'll probably begrudgingly see it, even though I don't want to. So, if people want me to see Ghostbusters Afterlife, let me know in the comments below. I'll probably figure out a way to see it for free, because that's what I'd probably usually do with every single theater release of a thing. If it's only theater exclusive, I will figure out a way to not go into theaters and watch this movie. Because I'm like, no, I've basically avoided every theatrical release of things, and I've run the gambit of just not having to go to theaters to see any of these. I will see a bootleg version of it. I will see a crappy version of. I don't care. I don't want to see it in theater. I don't want to. I don't want to see another movie in theaters in my life if I can avoid it now. Because like have an exclusive premium whatever access thing that I can just watch wherever I want, regardless, for free most of the time. So with that said, I'm gonna get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.